My name is Alex. I am 28 years old, and I was born and raised in a small town in the heart of America. Our town had a traditional appearance: one-story houses with neat courtyards, a main street with a few shops and cozy cafes, and a small city park with a bright carousel that came to life in the evenings. For me, this place has always been my home, where I learned the warmth of family and the first lessons of life. My father, David, was an Air Force veteran, and after his service, he started a small business related to repairs and furniture making. He always seemed to me a man who could do everything: fix a door, build a treehouse, or figure out why the engine in a car was knocking. My mother, Sarah, devoted her life to her family. She was a housewife, but she managed to do much more. She baked the most delicious pies in the district, organized charity events at our church, and always found a moment to give good advice. For some time, she worked as a secretary at the local school, so every student knew her as a friendly lady with an always open smile. I have a younger sister, Emma. She and I argued like all children, but more often we were best friends. Emma showed artistic abilities from childhood. She played the piano, sang in the school choir, and participated in drama clubs. She was the soul of the company, able to relieve any tension. Our house, although small, seemed to me a cozy fortress in which love and harmony reigned. On weekends, we would cook a big family dinner together, and then everyone would sit in the living room to watch old comedies or family dramas. Dad would usually put his arm around Mom's shoulders, and they would laugh at some stupid thing the host had just said on the screen. Emma, sitting between them, would laugh the loudest, and I would make jokes to get attention too. But as I got older, I began to notice that there were shadows lurking behind this idol. In the evenings, my father and mother would argue more and more often, sometimes for long periods. I didn't know what was going on, but I could feel the atmosphere growing more and more tense. While we could laugh at jokes in the yard during the day, at night we would hear muffled whispers or irritated raised tones coming from their room. Then they would both pretend that nothing had happened, but the tension would still hang in the air. Sometimes I tried to find out from my mother why my father was so distant or why they couldn't get along. My mother would smile her usual sad smile, pat my hand, and say, "There's a reason for everything, Alex. Dad and I will work it out." But there was a weariness in her eyes that couldn't be hidden. My father, when I tried to start a conversation, remained silent. He would simply reply, "That's adult business, son," and then switch the subject to my schoolwork or the sports competitions I was supposed to participate in. I resigned myself to it because, like most children, I thought that my parents would always manage on their own. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen soon. Maybe it was just a teenager's intuition, sensitive to the slightest fluctuations in behavior of adults. But I tried to remain calm and at the same time prepare for my own future. I was interested in computers and programming, and I imagined moving to a big city and becoming a software developer one day. My parents supported my dreams, even though they didn't really understand all the technological intricacies. In the quiet hours of our house, I felt a real family warmth. Emma and I would play board games, and my father and mother would look at us with a smile, sometimes joining in. Sometimes it seemed to me that nothing would ever break this cozy world. But deep down, I could see cracks appearing more and more often. I simply did not imagine that one of these cracks would eventually grow into a chasm that would forever divide our family. The high school in our town was small and located a few blocks from my house. I walked there every day, passing the well-groomed estates of my neighbors and meeting the same familiar people. It was a time when I was already thinking about where to continue my education after graduation, and I was increasingly fascinated by computer technology. The school had several clubs, including the school newspaper, the drama club, and the computer club. I chose the latter without hesitation. For me, there was nothing more interesting than understanding code, configuring programs, and imagining how it could all be applied in the big world outside our small town. My sister Emma was also a student at this school, but she was a year younger. She participated in the vocal ensemble and simply shone on stage during school concerts. I was always proud when I heard my friends admit that my sister had an incredible voice. Emma, unlike me, was more open to communication and always surrounded by a group of friends. I had a few good friends with whom we shared a love of computer games and fantasy films. Everything was going well until a family from another state moved to our town. One October, when yellow leaves covered the sidewalks in abundance, a new girl came to our class, Jennifer Lawrence. She was almost my age, had blonde hair braided in a loose braid, and had a somewhat shy smile. Mrs. Brown, our English teacher, introduced her to the class. "Students, this is Jennifer. She just moved to our town from Minnesota. Please help her adapt." On the first day, her seat was at the third desk by the window, almost opposite me. I noticed that she was constantly looking at her notebook and taking notes diligently whenever Mrs. Brown explained something. When it was time for lunch, I picked up my tray in the cafeteria and saw Jennifer awkwardly looking for a place to sit. Without thinking twice, I nodded to her, offering her a seat next to me and my friends. That was the first time I had spoken to her that day. She told me that her father had gotten a new job in our town and that her mother had temporarily stayed in Minnesota to finish some work projects. Jennifer said that she missed her old classmates, but would try to fit in as soon as possible. Her voice was quiet but pleasant. I sensed a certain warmth and sincerity in it that would later charm me so much. As the days passed, I found more and more opportunities to talk to Jennifer, either at the library or after school when we could walk home together. It turned out that she was a pretty good artist and a fan of science fiction, the same kind of books I loved. We would discuss our favorite novels, share our impressions of the latest movies, and sometimes just talk about life. Hers in Minnesota, mine here in town. All of this brought us closer together and made our meetings more and more desirable. Meanwhile, at home, my parents, David and Sarah, continued their strange arguments. I learned to ignore them, although I often woke up in the middle of the night to muffled voices behind the wall. Their arguments had some deeper reason that I couldn't understand. In the morning, my father would read the newspaper in the kitchen and just ask dryly how my day had been yesterday. Mom stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal, and seemed so absorbed in her own thoughts that she barely noticed me. My only saving grace was that I could meet Jennifer after school. One day we decided to help the school drama club set up the sets for a play. I carried heavy boards, and she figured out how to arrange them in the style of a fairy forest. We both laughed when we accidentally made crooked lines or ran paint over the floor. Our work together made us even more friendly. That was the first time I felt that she could be more than just a good friend to me. Emma also noticed that I was paying a lot of attention to Jennifer. "Does my brother really like someone?" she joked. I joked back, but I couldn't hide my smile. Emma then hinted that he and his friends liked Jennifer too, and I guess that amused me even more. At the same time, I was thinking about where I would go after graduation. I had good grades, and I wanted to go to a good technical college. My father said he would support me financially if I was serious. My mother suggested a closer school so that I could stay home, but I dreamed of broadening my horizons and moving to a big city. I told Jennifer about my plans, and she listened with genuine admiration. "You can achieve anything you want," she said quietly, inspiring me. The last years of school flew by quickly. I noticed that my parents began to communicate with each other even less often. Emma seemed to live more with her concerts and friends, avoiding the topic of her parents. And I tried to focus all my strength on preparing for admission, and at the same time on maintaining a relationship with Jennifer, which gradually grew from friendship to sympathy. The day we officially learned that I had been accepted to college was one of the happiest days of my life. I saw my mother's eyes light up as she hugged me and told me how proud she was. My father silently shook my hand and then added, "You're doing great, son." Jennifer was the first person I told the good news to. She was as happy for me as if she had just been accepted to that college herself. But time was running out. It was time for graduation, proms, and important decisions. Little did I know that between the glimmer of youth and the first independent steps in adulthood, I would have to face what I feared most: the breakup of our family and changes that would throw me off balance for a long time. All I had left was Jennifer's support and my own hope that perhaps any difficulties could be overcome if I believed in the best. The last few weeks of high school flew by so quickly. It seemed like yesterday that I had stepped foot in my first classroom, and now I had to say goodbye to the halls of my second home. The spring test we had taken had secured my spot at my chosen college. Now, the highlight of the season was the prom, the event that all of us had been eagerly awaiting. I was going to ask Jennifer to be my date, even though we hadn't yet officially called each other boyfriend and girlfriend. But all of our friends had long understood that something more than just friendship was developing between us. When I finally plucked up the courage to say those few words of invitation, Jennifer burst into a smile and said yes, almost jumping for joy. I had a feeling that this evening would be special for us. Prom preparations were a busy affair for the whole school. The boys chose their suits, the girls their dresses, and the teachers and parents coordinated the details of the holiday program. My mother, Sarah, also got involved in the process. She helped the organizers decorate the assembly hall and hang garlands of multicolored light bulbs. Despite her family difficulties, she was very happy for me and even picked out a tie to match Jennifer's outfit. My father, David, was only supposed to come to school for the ceremonial part of the graduation ceremony and photo session, but he, as always, kept a little distant. It seemed that he was less interested in all the school events than when I was younger. Finally, the big evening came. Jennifer appeared in an elegant light blue dress that harmonized beautifully with her blonde hair. I noticed how my heart sank with excitement and pride at the same time. She was charming. We danced to slow melodies, laughed, and took pictures with friends. At the end of the evening, I finally dared to kiss her lightly, and she kissed me back. That's when I finally realized that this was the beginning of our real relationship. The next day, after graduation ceremony, where Jennifer and I and all our friends gathered together for the last time, my joy was suddenly overshadowed by family drama. When I got home, my mom was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into space. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying for a long time. My dad was standing next to me. He spoke sharply, and I realized that they had just had a serious argument. "What happened?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Mom sighed and barely managed to say, "Your dad and I decided to live separately for a while." Dad just narrowed his eyes and muttered quietly, "This is adult stuff, Alex. We've made a decision." For me, these words came as a bolt from the blue, for I had just experienced one of the happiest moments of my life, graduation, and a kiss with a girl I liked. I rushed to ask for details, but my parents avoided frank explanations. To figure myself out, they called it. Mom was going to stay in our house, and Dad was going to temporarily move to a neighboring town, where he would rent an apartment. Emma, my sister, was almost the last to find out about this. She was at a school concert with her ensemble. When she got home, she learned everything from talking to me. She tried to reassure herself that this could only be a temporary pause. However, I noticed tears in her voice as she whispered, "No, this is not fair." The next few days were filled with confusion. Dad packed up, silently walking around the house, avoiding conversation. Mom hardly left her room. When I called Jennifer, she listened with sympathy to my stories about everything that was happening. I am grateful to her for simply being there, even if from a distance. She offered to meet to talk, and these meetings saved me from feeling helpless. It was during this period that I first felt that my cozy family world was rapidly collapsing. Of course, I saw that my parents were fighting, but I did not think that this would lead to their divorce, or at least a break, as they called it. I did not know whose side was right, and I could not understand what exactly was the reason for the conflicts. When leaving the house, Dad only said to me, "Alex, we need some space, but I will always be there if you need anything. I love you and Emma. It's just that Mom and I can't live together anymore." These words sounded like a confession that put an end to my usual life. At that time, I had no idea that this was just the beginning. In the future, I would have to endure much more difficult trials and learn that betrayal can hide where you least expect it. After my father, David, left our home and temporarily moved to a neighboring town, the atmosphere at home became depressing. My mother, Sarah, was silent and depressed most of the time. My sister, Emma, tried to fill the silence with piano lessons and singing, but she seemed confused herself. I could see her constantly checking her phone to see if my father had written to her, and how sad her voice was, even when she sang the happiest songs. I had to prepare for a move to a university a few hours away from our home. I had enrolled in a technical college, where I was going to study programming and computer engineering. It would seem that I should be happy about this new phase of my life, but I felt heavy in my heart at the thought of my parents no longer being together. I worried that I was moving away from my family at a time when they might need my support. Before leaving, I decided to visit my father. His new apartment was in a small 2-story building, quite modest, but clean and well-kept. When I met him on the threshold, my dad looked tired. He tried to smile like he used to, but his eyes showed anxiety. "How are you?" I asked, looking down at his small luggage that was still standing against the wall. "I'm alive," my dad sighed. "And you? Ready for college? You've been wanting to do that, haven't you?" I didn't know how to briefly describe all those conflicting feelings. On the one hand, I was really looking forward to student life. On the other, it hurt to not have him at home. But I decided to pull myself together and answer that I was ready to do anything to achieve my goal. My dad gave me some advice on the topic of independent living, including finding good friends, not being afraid to ask your teachers, and not forgetting to eat properly. After this casual conversation, I felt that there was a gap between us. Too much remained unsaid. We hugged goodbye, and I went home with an even bigger lump in my chest. Soon the day of my departure for college arrived. Mom tried to keep herself cheerful. She helped pack the suitcases, baked a whole bag of homemade cookies for the first time. Emma came with a friend to help move my things. Jennifer was also there. She planned to enter the local university in our town, but promised that we would see each other often, even from a distance. I put her in the passenger seat of my car, and we set off on a new journey together, for now, at least for a few days, until she returned home. The campus where I was to study made an impression. Beautiful buildings with modern laboratories, a large library with thousands of books, comfortable dormitories. I moved into a room with a new roommate, a guy named Marcus, who was also an IT guy and came from Texas. From the very first minutes we found a common language. We discussed our favorite video games and gadgets, argued about which operating system was better. I realized that I would be comfortable here, at least in terms of studying and living. Jennifer stayed with me for a few days until she had to return home to start the entrance formalities to her university. The two of us walked around town, went to small local cafes, and talked about the future. In the evenings, she asked if I would change my mind about our long-distance relationship. Not knowing how difficult it can be to maintain feelings over long distances, sincerely promised that we would manage. Meanwhile, in phone conversations with my mother, I learned that she and her father hardly communicate. Mom looked anxious, speaking in short sentences, as if afraid to say something important. Emma was also tense and told me that Dad seemed to be making new friends in his town and that he rarely came to visit her or Mom. I was especially worried about Mom. She was not used to being alone. She had always worked part-time or did housework, and now that Dad and I were gone and my sister Emma disappeared to rehearsals in the evenings, Mom was left alone with her thoughts. I had repeatedly suggested that she hire a psychologist, but she would wave it off, saying, "I'm fine, don't worry." But I could tell she was not well. The faint tremor in her voice betrayed her pain. Time passed, and I gradually became absorbed in student life. Morning lectures, practical classes in the laboratory, evenings in the library with a mountain of books. Marcus dragged me to various club events and meetings with fellow students. I liked it, although I still missed Jennifer and often called her. We were full of optimism, tried to make plans for the future, met whenever the opportunity arose. However, on a deeper level, I felt that the black cloud of family problems had not disappeared. I was tormented by the question, what really happened to my parents? My mother said that my father had stopped talking to her openly, as if he had distanced himself. I didn't have the strength to figure out who was right and who was wrong, and I could only beg them. Try to decide, ask for help. Evening thoughts about all this didn't let me sleep peacefully. I replayed in my head pictures of a happy childhood and compared them with what was happening now. Why had everything changed so dramatically? Where was that invisible line that they had both crossed? I had no idea that this was just the beginning. Events lay ahead that would destroy my idea of loyalty and trust forever. The beginning of college was something completely new and exciting for me, Alex. My life was divided into two parallel lines. One belonged to my student life, lectures, programming projects, endless struggle with deadlines, and the first parties that my roommate Marcus dragged me to. The other was closely connected to my hometown, where my mother Sarah and sister Emma stayed, and where my girlfriend Jennifer went. After a few days on campus, Jennifer returned home to sort out her formalities for admission to the local university. We often called each other, wrote each other, and said that the distance would not be an obstacle. But despite all our fervent promises, I felt the pull of circumstances. She was starting her academic year. I was starting mine, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to find convenient time to visit each other. I still managed to get away to my hometown for the weekend a few times. I drove my small old sedan, stayed at my mother's house. I was worried about her loneliness, although she assured me that everything was getting better little by little. My favorite cups were still in the kitchen, and in the hallway was my father's old jacket, which he could not throw away or even hide. It felt as if the house was frozen in anxious anticipation. Strange hints and conversations with my father. One September, my father, David, called me. It was unexpected. We usually talk once every few weeks, and I usually called him first. He sounded more cheerful than usual, and I noted this, pleasantly surprised. "How are you, son? How is college?" Dad's voice was calmer than before. "Everything is fine. I'm studying a lot, trying to keep up with the program." I tried to answer casually, but it was noisy around me in the dormitory, so I had to go out into the corridor. "I'm glad. Listen, I have a request for you." He paused for a moment, as if he was daring to continue. "If you can, come to my place next weekend. I'd like to talk to you." I was surprised by the offer, but I agreed. The following Saturday, instead of going straight to my hometown, I went to my dad's apartment in a neighboring town. When I arrived, I saw that he had made a small renovation there. He had changed the furniture, hung new curtains, and there were completely different plates and cups in the kitchen. This confused me a little. It was as if Dad had started to arrange a life that was completely different from the one he had at home with his mother. We sat in his living room over a cup of coffee. At first, Dad asked about college, my grades, how the subjects were being taught. Then he frowned and moved on to talking about family. "Alex, I know you're wondering why Mom and I decided to break up. I can't explain everything yet, but we're both to blame. Maybe someday I'll tell you more." I felt that he wasn't telling the whole truth, but I didn't want to press him. The main thing was that I could see that Dad wasn't as broken as he used to be. He seemed to have found some spark in his new life. But back then, I had no idea where that spark came from or how destructive it could be for our entire family. Emma searched for answers. That same weekend, I also saw my sister Emma. She had grown up, looked mature, but I noticed a certain detachment in her. She avoids talking to her mother about her father, shares her feelings with few people. She said that she spends a lot of time in the school music group, and even plans to go with him to a competition in a neighboring state. At dinner, when her mother had already gone into another room, Emma whispered quietly, "Alex, are you sure that Dad just changed? Why did he suddenly become so calm and cheerful?" It seemed strange to me. I shrugged. I didn't know what to say. In general, Dad didn't look like a person with serious problems. On the contrary, he seemed happy. Maybe he had met some woman, I thought at the time. But this thought seemed normal for a single man who had just broken up with his wife. I had no idea that the real story would turn out to be much more complicated, deepening my relationship with Jennifer. A wave of changes also came to my relationship with Jennifer. She entered a local university to study design and art, so she had interesting classes, lots of projects and exhibitions every day. From now on, we were full-fledged students, only in different cities. At first, we wrote each other dozens of messages a day, called each other in the evenings, but gradually our schedules became more intense, and we felt that there was not enough time for long conversations. When I came home on weekends, we managed to sneak out for a date. We went to movies or had dinner in a cafe. told each other about our studies. Once, when I had just gotten out of the car at my mother's house, an excited Jennifer ran up to me. She had brought several of her drawings that she was particularly proud of, and she was showing them right in the yard. "This is my vision of the cityscape," she said, waving her pencils enthusiastically. "I want to make a series of illustrations about the contrast between the city and nature. Do you think it will work out?" Looking at her shining eyes and smile, I felt how much she wanted me to. Slippery and expensive. I tried not to show that I was depressed by family matters. Still, I wanted to have at least some kind of quiet haven. We agreed that as soon as possible, Jennifer would visit me at college, see the campus, and meet my friends. We planned it for the fall break. Disturbing hints. From time to time, I would get little messages, either from Mom or Emma, that there were rumors about Dad in town. Someone had seen him with a woman younger than him. Someone had heard that he was even thinking about selling his share of the business he once ran in our town. I tried to dismiss all this gossip, thinking that people like to invent sensationalism. However, one meeting at the local supermarket really excited me. I was buying groceries when an old acquaintance of my dad, Mr. Royce, a former neighbor, called out to me. He muttered in passing, "I'm sorry your parents are like that, but most importantly, be careful, Alex. It's not as simple as it seems." I wanted to ask what he meant, but he just brushed it off, saying that he didn't want to meddle in other people's business. A bad premonition scratched at my soul. Since childhood, I had learned to catch alarm signals that seemed to warn of a storm. And although I didn't know when this storm would hit, I had a feeling that it would hit hard and hurt me in the most painful place, in my belief in family values. Autumn was quickly gaining momentum. The trees on my campus were already covered in crimson and gold leaves. The campus looked picturesque, but I often admired from the library window, where I spent long hours. Deadlines for lab work and project were on my tail, but I tried to stay afloat, remembering that I had entered this school at the call of a dream. The first surprise. One Saturday morning, as I was about to leave the dormitory, Jennifer called me. "Hi, I have a surprise for you," she announced happily. "Don't be shy, tell me." I smiled, imagining that she had probably made a new bright illustration or won a contest. "I'm already driving to your campus. I wanted to come earlier, but I'm only now free from classes. So get ready to meet you." I almost dropped my phone in surprise. Without delay, I rushed to the central square, where students usually gathered during breaks. And indeed, a few minutes later I saw her car, from which Jennifer ran out, waving her hand. She was wearing a bright yellow jacket that matched the autumn landscape. We threw ourselves into each other's arms, not paying attention to the fact that dozens of other students were walking by. "I missed you so much." She looked at me with shining eyes. "I thought I want to see you right here, in your new environment. Will you show me everything?" I agreed, and we went on a short tour. I showed her a computer science building, the classrooms where I listened to lectures, our rich library with a separate room for technical literature. We went to the cafeteria for lunch, where Jennifer met my neighbor Marcus. He exchanged a few jokes with her about design, said that he'd also wanted to enter the art faculty at one time, but chose programming. Dad's new couple. Everything seemed to be fine until I received a message from Emma. She wrote, "Alex, you won't believe it. I saw Dad in the city with some young woman. They had dinner together. They were very close. Then I heard him introduce her to someone he knew, and she was clearly not just a friend. I find it so strange." I sighed and showed the message to Jennifer. She squeezed my hand with understanding. "I know how hard it is for you," she said. "But Dad is free now. Maybe he's trying to start over? The question is, won't that hurt your mother and you too much?" I want to get more information, so I called Emma. She confirmed that Dave and the woman looked like a couple in love. Although Dad had never officially announced their new relationship to anyone, Emma was worried about her mother, but she just brushed it off when she learned about her father's meeting with someone else. "That's his life," Mom commented coldly. "An evening together." I didn't want to ruin Jennifer and me, so I tried to switch things up. We had a great evening. We went to a student jazz band concert and then returned to my dorm room, where Marcus had kindly left us alone, going to see his friends. Jennifer and I watched an old movie on our laptop, and she rested her head on my shoulder, laughing quietly at the funny scenes. At some point, I realized that despite all the storm going on in my family, there was someone there who was ready to be my support. Jennifer supported me, even when I was in a bad mood because of the troubles with my parents. It seemed that our feelings were really getting stronger because we were going through obstacles together, rumors and doubts. The next morning, I walked Jennifer back to her car. We agreed that she would come back in a month, just in time for the fall holidays. I stood there, looking after her car, and thought that I was lucky to meet a girl who understood and shared my experiences. However, the joy of meeting her was quickly replaced by a new wave of anxiety. My mother wrote a short message. "I heard that your father wants to sell our old workshop. He says he doesn't want to do it anymore. You know, he had a lot of orders there. Just know, I don't mind he decides so, but it's sad that he's actually severing his last ties with the city." It was strange, because Dad had always been proud of that workshop where he made furniture, sometimes repaired something for neighbors. Why had he suddenly decided to give it all up? And who was this young woman that Emma saw? All these questions kept me awake again. I tried to reassure myself. Maybe he just wanted to change. But inside, a sharp feeling grew. The changes could be much deeper than they seemed at first glance. As the weeks of college passed, Alex learned to keep myself in shape. Waking up early, running to lectures, doing a bunch of lab assignments, and at the same time finding time to call home and talk to Jennifer. At first, it seemed to me that everything was going as it should, and my inner anxiety was gradually subsiding. But it soon became clear this was just a calm before the next storm. The first attempt to talk frankly with my father, in mid-October, I decided that it was time to the IS in my relationship with my father. I called him in the evening, when I had a free hour. "Dad, hello. Can I come this weekend? I want to talk seriously." "Yes, come." David's voice sounded calm, albeit a little surprised. "I wanted to talk to you too, son." On Saturday morning, I got in the car and drove to the town where my father now lived. On the way, I thought about what I was going to say several times. I planned to ask him directly about his new passion and why he decided to sell the old workshop he loved so much. I was tormented by the thought that my father was walking away from everything that had once connected us and would not explain why. My father met me on the threshold of his apartment, offered me coffee. I looked around. I noticed that some things had changed since my previous visit. There was a bouquet of fresh flowers on the table. A new vase appeared on the shelf. It seemed that the presence of someone else was felt in the apartment. We sat down in the living room, and I decided not to delay. "Dad, I know that you are seeing a woman. Emma has seen you too. You hardly come to your hometown. You are selling our workshop. Can you explain what's going on?" He paused for a moment, as if he was considering how best to respond. Then he exhaled. "Yes, I'm really meeting someone who helped me rethink my life. Your mother and I haven't had anything in common for a long time. We've just been stalling for time. I don't want to lie to you or hide anything, but please understand, this is purely my business. I didn't hide my confusion. What about Emma and I? Have you thought about how this looks for us? Why is everything so abrupt?" Dad looked away. "I know it hurts, but you're an adult, Alex. We all make choices. Maybe someday I'll explain in more detail, but for now, that's it. And I've decided to sell the workshop because I no longer see myself in that business. I need to move on." After those words, we were silent for a long time. I realized that he was not ready for a frank conversation and was obviously hiding something. I left him with a heavy heart, feeling that my questions had remained unanswered. Mom's strange state. That same day, towards evening, I drove to our family home. Mom, as always, greeted me with a strained smile. She made tea, asked about college and my academic success. She didn't say a word about Dad, and I didn't dare bring up the subject myself, seeing how much pain she was in. Instead, I noticed that she had become very weak. It was as if she lacked the strength to do even the most basic things. Mom joked that she's been volunteering at the church a lot now, which was why she was tired. Emma was at a friend's house, so I didn't find her home. I went to my old room, where everything was as it was. I sat on the bed, looking at the walls with children's posters, and felt the sharp pain of losing that home comfort that had once been so natural to me. Tension with Jennifer. Returning to the dormitory, I plunged headlong into my studies, trying to distract myself. I corresponded with Jennifer for several days, but noticed that she answered less often and sometimes avoided phone calls. This was a little alarming, but I wrote it all off to her academic workload. But one evening, when I still managed to call her, I heard a certain detachment in her voice that was uncharacteristic of her. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Yes, everything is okay," she answered, but she sounded uncertain. "I just have a lot of projects, night classes in the studio. Sorry that I don't write much." I decided not to press, understanding how difficult the beginning of studies can be. However, the anxiety did not go away. The thought kept running through my head. What if our distance is already making itself felt? However, I really did not want to imagine that we could move away from each other after everything we'd been through. I still believed in the sincerity of our feelings. Another rumor. Later, news reached me from former neighbors. They said that Dad was no longer hiding his relationship with a new woman, and they had even been seen in a neighboring state. Someone gossiped that he was planning to move there altogether. Someone suggested that it was just a business trip. It was hard for me to believe that my father was changing his life so radically. Somewhere deep down, I caught myself being angry with him for my mother's betrayal. But at the same time, I understood nothing had been proven, and he had the right to a personal life after breaking up with her. I remembered how, as a child, he had taught me to ride a bicycle, holding me up so I wouldn't fall. When we worked together in the workshop, he had shown me how to hold a tool, so I wouldn't get hurt. Now it all seemed like something from another life. I tried to find the strength to forgive and accept the new reality, but I felt myself beginning to doubt whether I had correctly assessed our relationship. Perhaps we had been living in the illusion of a perfect family for many years. The calm before the Big Bang. The realization that something or someone had appeared in my father's life that had radically changed him did not bring me peace. But at the same time, I had no evidence that this could harm me or my mother directly. However, my hunch was that hidden pitfalls would certainly make themselves felt. In evening conversations with Emma or my mother, I would hear snippets about my father behaving strangely, but no one knew for sure what was going on. Almost every day I would say to myself, well, okay, maybe we should just give it time. But I felt that time would only complicate the situation, because the truth that we did not yet know could turn out to be much more terrible than our assumptions. October was coming to an end, and I, Alex, was already looking forward to a short break from school, the fall holidays. I planned to spend a few days at home, see my mother, my sister Emma, and spend some time with Jennifer. We had agreed that she would take a weekend off from university and come to our town. I dreamed of quiet days with coffee and walks, hoping to distract myself from heavy thoughts about my father, reuniting with my hometown. When I arrived, I immediately felt a familiar echo of past worries. The house greeted me with cold autumn air that penetrated through the open windows. My mother, Sarah, was home and seemed happy to see me back. However, when she saw me, she repeated her usual phrase, "Don't worry about me, son. I'll be fine." Everything in the kitchen was the same as last time. Only the newspapers on the table showed that my mother was actively browsing job advertisements or volunteer programs. She didn't admit that she was looking for a new job, but it was obvious that she needed a distraction. Emma, on the other hand, had come home from school with a whole armful of music notebooks. Her band had to prepare for a competition. My sister just shrugged when I tried to ask about my dad and turned the conversation to music and her solo rehearsals. Jennifer arrives with mixed emotions. Jennifer also arrived in our town in the evening. I met her at the bus stop. She decided not to take the car, saying that she wanted to take a break from driving and had a ticket for a convenient flight. When she got off the bus, I felt the same joy as usual. We hugged, and I promised that the next few days would be ours alone. However, when we got to my house, I noticed some strange notes of tension in Jennifer's behavior. She seemed distant, although she tried to hide it behind a smile. I wrote it off as fatigue from the road and suggested that we take a break. In the evening, We planned to walk through our old park and then have dinner at a small restaurant where we had once celebrated our graduation. A conversation that leaves more questions. During dinner, when we were already sitting at the table, Jennifer suddenly said, "Alex, would you mind if I went to the neighboring town tomorrow on business? I have an acquaintance. I need to discuss a creative project." I was embarrassed because she had come to my place, and we had agreed to spend time together. However, I decided not to make a scene. "Okay," I replied, "but we planned days together. Is this for a long time?" "Just for a few hours," Jennifer assured me. "I promise I'll be back by evening." I still didn't understand why she was going to the next town. It was the same town where my dad, David, now lived. But she didn't elaborate, just saying it was about some design project. Suspicious coincidences. The next morning, Jennifer took the bus. I offered to give her a ride, but she declined, saying it was convenient and not far. Instead, I stayed home with Mom and Emma. We had apple pancakes for lunch, a favorite dish from childhood. It would have been okay if Dad hadn't written to me. He sent a short message. "Hi, son. If you're in town tonight, maybe we can meet up this evening? I have some business." It was clear from the context that Dad was also in the next town. I found myself thinking, what if he's the same person Jennifer is going to meet? It sounded absurd, because why would she want to meet my dad? But what other contacts could be pulling her there? I started to remember if I had told her exactly where her father lived, and then I pushed the thought away because it was too absurd. However, the doubts did not give me peace. I called my dad and replied that I was busy at home, that I had my own plans. Maybe I would meet him tomorrow. He didn't seem to mind. He just said that he would wait for the call. As I ended the conversation, I sensed a strange excitement in his voice, as if he was in a hurry somewhere too. Jennifer's return and a sharper mood. Jennifer returned in the evening. I met her on the doorstep, trying to read her eyes, but she looked exhausted and immediately looked away. "I'm sorry I was late," she said. "Things have been going on there. How are you?" I was silent for a few seconds, feeling an internal struggle. I wanted to ask her directly who she had been seeing, but in the end, I decided to make do with hints. "I hope your project is worth the whole day you spent on it." Was I worried for nothing? "Of course, everything is fine," she replied shortly. "I need to take a shower and rest a little." I could see that she was avoiding details. This alarmed me even more. That night, we hardly spoke at all. I didn't want to nag and offend her, and I was afraid of the answers myself. The next morning with news from Dad. The morning began with another message from Dad. "Alex, I'm sorry, but I'm going to another city today. I hope you won't be offended if we see each other some other time. Take care of yourself." I had no direct evidence that Jennifer was dating my father, but an inner voice whispered, "Too many coincidences." I tried to talk to Em about it, but she advised me not to jump conclusions. See, it's better to ask Jennifer directly when I dare. Mutual understatement. The last days of our fall vacation passed with a feeling of falsehood, as if Jennifer and I were both looking forward to meeting, and at the same time each of us was hiding something important. I could see that she wanted to tell me, but every time she stopped, remained silent, or changed the topic to studies or other trifles. I also didn't dare to throw out my guesses in her face without a single fact, so as not to offend her and not to destroy trust. Returning to college, I felt that our relationship was no longer so easy. My mood worsened every day. Scenarios were spinning in my head, one worse than the other. I wanted to believe that all this was my excessive suspicion, born of family problems. But foreboding grew like a dark cloud. Something very important is hidden behind those silences. After that strange fall break, I, Alex, returned to college feeling that Jennifer and I were on the edge of our relationship. We stayed together, but we both felt the tension. Our conversations were kind of choppy, and she often said that she was tired from her design projects. I also avoided talking openly about why I had become so anxious. It seemed that there was something driving us apart that we didn't want to admit. Finding the facts. However, the disturbing thought that Jennifer might be seeing my father was nagging me. I knew I needed some real evidence before I could start accusing her of cheating or lying. One evening, when she didn't answer my calls, I decided to take a step that I still regret. I went to her profile on one of the social networks and tried to find any recent notes, comments, or photos from places where she might have been in the neighboring town. She really hadn't posted much. In recent weeks, she had hardly posted anything at all. So I didn't find anything suspicious, except for a few likes on posts related to furniture and interior design. This in itself was innocent. But the thought always came to my mind. Dad used to work in furniture, renovations. Could they have found some common interest? A sudden call from Emma. A few days after the holidays, my sister, Emma, called me. She sounded excited. "Alex, there's something you need to see. Should I send it to you by mail, or I don't know, on Messenger?" What happened? My throat went dry because Emma's voice was too serious. I found a strange envelope in my mother's things. I don't know if it ended up there by chance, but inside the photo, there's Dad with a woman. I can't see her face clearly because their backs are turned, but she seems younger than him. Most likely, this woman is someone special to him, judging by the way they're standing in each other's arms. Mom doesn't seem to know about it, or doesn't want to show that she knows. I asked Emma to send me the photos via secure messenger. The few minutes of waiting seemed like an eternity. When the photos arrived, I examined them in magnification. Indeed, the man was clearly Dad. It was easy to recognize him. But the woman was standing sideways to the camera. Her hair was blonde, slightly below her shoulders in profile. Her face was not visible, only the general silhouette. But deep down, I felt a cold fear grip me. In the picture, she had about the same figure and hairstyle as Jennifer. Confused thoughts. I tried to calm myself down. Blonde hair and average height, and younger than Dad. There are thousands of such descriptions. It could have been any woman. Unless that strange meeting in the neighboring town, Jennifer's mysterious excuses, Dad's regular business trips. The puzzle was coming together into a frightening picture. I asked Emma where Mom had gotten these photos from. She said the envelope was lying among old documents in the attic. Maybe someone had dropped them anonymously, or Mom had received in the mail and immediately hid them. Emma didn't dare talk to Mom, so as not to traumatize her again. I didn't know how to ask about it either. Mom was barely holding on. She was frail and almost always avoided the topic of Dad. Uncomfortable rumors. Meanwhile, the rumors continued to spread. A former neighbor wrote to me that he had seen my dad one evening leaving a bar, hugging a young woman. Another family friend hinted that my dad had enlisted some promising designer to start a business or something. Maybe it was just chatter, but I shuddered at the word designer. After all, Jennifer was studying at the Faculty of Design. Desperate steps. Not having the strength to suffer alone, I decided to share my doubts with Marcus, my dorm roommate. He listened to everything in silence and then asked, "Alex, why don't you talk openly with Jennifer? If she's not guilty of anything, then you'll feel it from her reaction. Because now you're tormented by guesses. What if it's all just a misunderstanding?" Marcus's words seemed logical, so I decided to act. I called Jennifer and asked her to come over for the weekend for a day. It's important to talk. She hesitated at first, citing a rush of projects, but eventually agreed. It was a risk on my part. If my suspicions are confirmed, I didn't know if I could control myself. The coming meeting. Friday seemed incredibly long. I was sitting on the couch and couldn't concentrate. My head was constantly spinning with those photos with my dad, the meetings in the neighboring town, Jennifer's behavior. I could already clearly imagine her coming into my room, and me blocking the exit, asking for an explanation. But at the same time, I was afraid to hear the truth that could ruin my life. On Saturday night, I had a nightmare. I saw my dad standing in my house, hugging Jennifer, and my mom and Emma crying in the corner. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I realized that until I talked to Jennifer, this horror wouldn't stop. On Saturday morning, I, Alex, went to bed almost at dawn, or rather, dozed off for a few hours after the nightmares. I woke up to the fact that the phone almost rang under my pillow. I looked up Jennifer. My heart sank. So she was already driving up, meeting in the dormitory. When I went down to the lobby of the student dormitory, I saw Jennifer sitting on a bench by the window. She looked a little tired, as if she hadn't slept enough either. Our eyes met. I felt that the air in the room seemed to thicken. A serious conversation was about to happen. "Hello," she said quietly. "Nice to see you." I answered as softly as possible, although my heart was heavy. We went up to my room. My neighbor Marcus tactfully left early and left a note that he would return later. Jennifer took off her jacket and looked around, as if looking for a place to sit. I offered her a chair and sat on the edge of the bed. The beginning of the awkward questions. The silence dragged on until I exhaled. "Okay, I want to be direct. I'm worried about our relationship. I feel like you're hiding something, and I'm starting to suspect something worse. I want to hear the truth, even if it's unpleasant." Jennifer looked at me anxiously, as if considering where to start. "Alex, I can see that you've been tense for a long time, too. But please explain what you suspect me of." I flinched. I didn't want to immediately throw accusations about my father at her, but I knew there was no point in dragging it out any further. So I gathered my courage. "Do you remember going to a neighboring town? And you didn't explain who you were seeing." "The thing is, my dad lives there now. I suspect that maybe you're seeing each other." I looked up, waiting for some reaction. Jennifer blushed, and looked away. The silence lasted a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Confession or denial? Finally she spoke. "Indeed, I was seeing David, your dad." My ears were ringing. Hearing confirmation, I suddenly felt like I was falling into some abyss. But her next words were a little startling. "This is strictly a work matter. Alex, the university gave us an assignment to develop an interior design project. I found out that your dad was a furniture and renovation guy, back when you were all living together. I thought this would be a great opportunity to get some practical experience. At first, I wanted to ask you to arrange a meeting, but knowing how tense your family is right now, I didn't want to provoke a fight, so I went to him myself." I was stunned. "Why didn't you tell me straight up? You know how I'd feel about this." My voice trembled with emotion. Jennifer bit her lip. "I was afraid you'd be against it. After all, I really had a chance to work on a real design project. Your dad wanted to move or maybe renovate the apartment. But I see that I did something stupid by hiding it from you. Photos and a break in trust." I remembered the photos I had received from Emma. Of course, Jennifer could have been standing from behind. But was she there? The decision came impulsively. I pulled out my phone and showed those pictures. "What are these? How do you explain it? They don't look like any business meetings. People are standing around hugging. The woman looks so young." Jennifer stared at the image, turning pale. Then she clutched her head. "Oh my, Alex, that's not me." Although she squinted, looking more closely at the photo. "At first glance, the hairstyle is similar, but it's definitely not my coat, and I've never hugged your father, at least not in this context." I took a breath. There was a certain logic to her words. Indeed, the photos didn't show her face, and the woman's coat in the pictures was dark blue with a fur collar. Jennifer was wearing a different jacket now. I'd never seen anything like it on her before. Emotional clash. Then why did he bring you in? He knows we're seeing each other, and he hasn't said a word to me. Why all the secrets if it's just work? There was desperation in my voice. Jennifer shrugged. "Your dad must have understood that you would be against any contact between me and him. He said that he was not ready to talk to you yet. Maybe he was afraid of further exacerbating your family conflicts." I sat, clutching my head. My suspicions had weakened, but not disappeared. There were too many inconsistencies. First, why is he still hiding that he is working with my girlfriend? Second, who is in the photo then? Temporary relief. Seeing that I was overcome with emotion, Jennifer quietly came over and sat next to me. "Alex, I don't want to ruin what we have. I love you. I'm really sorry that I didn't say everything at once. But for me, it was just a project, you know? Your dad is competent in furniture and renovations. I never thought you could suspect something so terrible." She placed her hand on mine. I met her gaze, feeling a mixture of shame and relief. Shame, because I might have really overdone it, and relief, because at least I had some kind of answer. "Okay," I breathed. "I trust you that this is all working." But there are still so many questions for Dad. He's clearly seeing someone younger than him, and I was afraid that... Jennifer sighed. I think you should talk to him again. And I don't mind either, but please don't suspect me without reason. I've always been honest with you. More secrets. We sat in silence for a while longer, each digesting what we had heard. I felt that we were still far from finding out the truth. After all, if the woman in the photo wasn't Jennifer, then who was she? If Dad was still hiding it from me, then there must be something more serious going on than just a new romance. Besides, he probably didn't need so much advice from a budding designer like Jennifer. Somewhere inside, I felt like I had only been partially reassured. But at this point, I didn't want to lose Jennifer and ruin our relationship with assumptions. I decided that I needed to take a breather, at least for a few days. So what should I do now? I asked, as an awkward pause fell between us again. We can try to move on, she replied, giving me a small hug. And then we'll see if your dad and I can work out a way out of all these misunderstandings. I felt a brief sense of relief, but then the question popped into my mind again. Was this really just a misunderstanding? Several weeks had passed since our difficult conversation with Jennifer. It seemed that we had managed to reestablish some trust, at least a visible one. In phone conversations, she would talk about her studies and sometimes mention that she had business left for the project. But she assured me that she had not yet contacted David, my father. I tried to believe her, but deep down, the anxiety did not go away. New hints from my mother. One evening, my mother, Sarah, called me. We had last spoken a few days ago, so I was not surprised to see her name on the screen. However, there was an uncharacteristic sharpness in her voice. Alex, hello. Listen, I would like to meet you. I have doubts about your father. His secret is bothering me. I tried to find out what she meant, but my mother did not really want to talk on the phone. Then we agreed that I would come over the following weekend, and she would tell us everything. Before we hung up, she added, I think I'll take a look at his old workshop. They say he left some things there that he didn't want to take. Maybe something will come to light. An unexpected find in the workshop. A few days later, I got another call from my mother where she said in a whisper, Alex, I don't know what to do with this, but I found some strange notes and checks in a drawer in the workshop. There are statements in the name of someone DL and JS. Initials that I can't decipher. They're clearly not mine or yours or Emma's. Maybe they're the customer's signatures? Or maybe... My heart sank. DL, David Lawrence, my dad. But he is also known as David. So what kind of abbreviation DL could he use? And most importantly, who is JS? Of course, it could be any people, but the initials JS in my head instantly connected with Jennifer. I remembered that her last name was Lawrence. We changed her father's name, or was she Lawrence? Wait, did we say that her name was Jennifer Lawrence? Then her initials were JL, not JS. But my mother didn't see for sure whether it was S or L. She could have made a mistake with her handwriting. Or they were different people altogether. I didn't want to screw her over for nothing. So I advised her to keep the find and wait until I came and looked at it myself. A call from Emma, jewelry that was too expressive. That same evening, Emma, my sister, called me. She sounded excited and blurted out immediately, Alex, you won't believe it, but I was in my dad's apartment again. It happened like this. I went in to give him some old documents. He didn't want to let me in. He stood in the doorway, as if blocking the door with his own body. When I did go through, I saw a woman's earrings on the table in the hallway. One fell to the floor, and I picked it up. It had the initials JL engraved on it. I felt my blood run cold. JL, obviously Jennifer Lawrence. This is too big a coincidence. Emma, are you sure it was JL there, not some patterns? I tried to find a rational explanation, but my voice was shaking. You can come and see for yourself tomorrow. I kept it. My dad didn't even notice I took it with me. My hands were gripping the phone so tightly that they were speechless. Did this mean Jennifer was lying after all? She claimed she only had brief business meetings with her father, and they had stopped talking at all. Why leave the earrings in his apartment then? Clouds gathering. In the next few days, I was unable to eat or sleep properly. Marcus looked at me with sympathy, but he didn't ask for details. He knew the situation was tense. I tried to call Jennifer, but she dropped my 2 calls and only replied briefly, "I'm in class. I'll call you back later." She didn't call back an hour or 2 later. Now there was little doubt left. If my father had earrings with the initial jail lying around, it was more than a design project. And I remembered the photos where the mysterious blonde had her back turned. Perhaps there was no other woman, and it had been Jennifer from the very beginning. She must have been deliberately avoiding direct contact with the lens. A real wave of rage and despair washed over me. I remembered all those coincidences, the reluctance to tell, the meetings in the neighboring town, the photos, the initials, now these earrings. "This can't be," my inner voice shouted. But the facts confirmed my worst suspicions. Does Mom suspect a worse truth? Mom didn't say anything directly about Jennifer, but I could sense that she was starting to suspect something. In one of her messages, she had said, "Your father seems to have crossed all boundaries. Alex, come over soon. Let's talk." I find it hard to talk about this on the phone. Her words sounded like she knew more than she wanted to say. I remembered how Mom had met Jennifer before we went to different colleges. Mom had said she liked her, but that was a long time ago, before we had this storm. Maybe Sarah had already learned the truth, or at least part of it, from someone? The terrible denouement approaching. I sat up all night staring at my phone screen, hesitating whether to text Jennifer directly and ask, "Whose earrings with the initials jail are at Dad's house?" But I understood. This conversation should take place face to face. Because if it is true that they hid their relationship, then most likely Jennifer will try to lie to me again. Only this time I will not believe her without serious arguments. In the end, I decided not to write anything to her. It hurts too much. It is better to go home and find out everything once and for all. I agreed with Emma that I would come over on the weekend, look at those earrings, and we would go to my mother's together. First of all, I had to tell her the truth, no matter how unbearable it was. Returning home. On Saturday morning, I, Alex, set off from college with a heavy heart. I was haunted by fear and anger at the same time on the way. I stopped the car on the side of the road several times to calm down. The thought that my own girlfriend could be secretly involved with my father was incredibly painful. But the facts spoke for themselves, and I had to see everything with my own eyes. When I got to our old house, my mother, Sarah, met me on the threshold with a worried look. I could see that she could hardly hide her despair. It seemed that she, too, felt that something terrible and unacceptable was happening in the family. "Son, you are as pale as a wall. Come in." My mother's voice sounded quiet but firm. I entered the living room, where everything was the same as before. The old sofa where we watched movies as a family, the dining table where we had friendly conversations. Now this coziness seemed to have turned into the scene of a family tragedy. "Emma said you had some very unpleasant news for me," I said, my shoulders slumped. "And you wanted to show me something yourself?" "Mom's fine. Confirmation of the worst?" "Yes," Mom answered, leading me into the kitchen. There was a small file on the table. Remember, I was talking about those checks and notes from the workshop? I started looking at them more carefully. "Here." She opened the file. Inside, I saw several letters with illegible markings. At the top of one of them was a signature or initials DL and J. The rest had been erased or crossed out, but the floor seemed to have been moved out from under my feet. Everything pointed to some kind of agreement or project signed by 2 people, obviously my father and the same mysterious J. There are notes here about a joint lease or purchase of a new apartment, dated a few months ago. Whispered my mother, barely holding back tears. I suspect that he was preparing to move somewhere with her, and it seems that this J is very young. Of course, I can't say for sure that it's Jennifer, but... She fell silent, afraid to voice her terrible suspicion out loud. I felt everything inside was contracting with anger and pain. Emma's earring, the last piece of evidence. Then Emma came into the kitchen. She was holding a small, shiny earring in her hand. She came up to me and held it out as if it were physical evidence. "Here, look for yourself. It has jail engraved on it. It's the same last name as your Jennifer, Lawrence. Am I wrong?" I took the piece of jewelry and examined it carefully. The letters jail were clearly visible in the rays of daylight. There was no doubt these were the initials my girlfriend signed with. And these small symbols seemed to break something inside me. "Where did you get this?" I said with difficulty. Emma blurted out, "I told you I was in my dad's apartment when I was filing documents. I saw earrings on the table in the hallway. I accidentally dropped one on the floor, and I hid this one unnoticed when he turned away." My mother and I exchanged a look of desperation. I thought, oh my God, not this. Was she cheating on me with my own father? A burst of anger. I felt an explosion brewing inside me. Pain, despair, disgust, and furious anger mixed together. I jumped up, almost knocking over my chair. Why? Why? How could they? I screamed out loud, unable to hold back my tears. I understand that after my father broke up with my mother, he could have gone to someone else. But Jennifer, why her? My mother tried to calm me down, but I recoiled. It felt like the whole world had turned upside down, and there was nothing to lean on. I saw tears welling up in my mother's eyes as she looked at me. Emma struggled to hold back her tears, trying to explain the irrefutable. Suddenly my phone rang. The screen showed Jennifer's name. I looked at my mother and sister. They were waiting for me to react. Anger boiled in my veins, but I, gritting my teeth, answered the call. "Alex," came the voice on the other end. "I need to talk to you immediately. I'm coming to your town today. Promise me you'll meet me, okay?" Her voice trembled, as if she didn't know where to start. I was silent for a few seconds, trying not to burst into aggression. "Okay," I said coldly. "Come. You still have to..." All the eyes. She sighed with relief. She was obviously afraid that I wouldn't pick up the phone at all. I hung up without saying another word. Mom suspects the worst. We were silent again. Mom looked at me with eyes that were a mixture of sympathy and helplessness. Finally, she said quietly, "Alex, it seems like your dad was preparing for this relationship in advance. I can't imagine how long they hid everything. I feel cheated to the core. But you need to know that it's not your fault." Her words were supposed to comfort me, but all I felt was anger, disappointment, and shame. After all, I trusted Jennifer, cherished our relationship, and she could meet with my father while I was sure that we were having a slight long-distance crisis. In search of final answers. "We need to find out everything from her directly," I replied. "Now I have proof. Let her say it was a design project or some other lie." Emma suggested aloud. "And that Dad could come with Jennifer or somehow influence the conversation if they were acting according to a common plan." Mom shook her head. "In any case, you need to hear the truth, and then decide what to do next. I'll be there, son." I looked at the calendar on the wall. It turned out that in the evening I was supposed to meet Jennifer face to face and hear how she would explain it all. It was as if a fire had lit inside me. I wanted to hear every word of the truth, no matter how painful it was. Evening had descended on our town, filling the streets with a faint haze. The tension in my home was heavy. My mother, Sarah, was locked in her room. Emma sat in the next room, quiet, and I stood by the living room window, watching the headlights of a car stop in the driveway. It was Jennifer. She had come to finally give me an explanation. Everything inside me was boiling like boiling lava. I was clutching tightly in my hand the same earring with the initials jail that Emma had found. It was probably my last argument. If Jennifer started to deny something again, meeting on the threshold, when she approached the door, I opened it, not giving her a chance to ring or knock. The light from the living room lamp caught her face, pale, agitated, with traces of recent tears. I silently invited her in with a gesture. Jennifer took a step inside, looked around. Like me, she remembered this house well because we used to spend a lot of time here together. It seemed that every familiar corner had now become hostile for her. "Thank you for agreeing to talk," she said uncertainly. I nodded, invited her into the living room. She sat down on the sofa, and I remained standing, holding an invisible barrier circle around me. I didn't want to come closer until I heard the truth. "Tell me everything yourself. You have a chance to tell me everything yourself." I finally broke the silence. "Don't lie. Don't make up anything about study projects or chance meetings. I know much more than you think. I saw Jennifer shiver and lower her head. Sighing heavily, she wrapped her arms around herself as if she was cold. Then she began to say, Alex, I don't even know where to start. Yes, I've really been seeing your father a lot lately. At first it was about design. He offered me to design an interior, help with the move. I agreed because you thought it was a great career opportunity? I pricked up. Jennifer sighed. Yes, maybe at first it was really work. But later, we became closer than we should have been. I felt confused. You were far away, I missed you. And your dad, he was there, he knew how to support me, and she trailed off, her lips curling as if afraid to say the next words. I felt my whole body tighten with hatred. David's exit from the shadows. And at that moment, a tall figure appeared in the living room doorway. David, my dad, stood there looking at us. Maybe my mom let him in, or maybe he unlocked the door himself, having his own keys. Dad, what are you doing here? My voice was filled with anger. What? Is this a mutual agreement? Come and explain to me together? But he didn't go any further, standing in the doorway, clutching the keys in his hand. Jennifer looked at him in confusion. It seemed that this meeting was not part of her plan. Alex, sorry for not inviting me, David began, but I need to talk to you too. I clenched my fists, feeling like I was about to explode. An explosion of emotions. Talk? Seriously, I didn't recognize my voice. It was so full of rage. Betray your own wife and son, and now you want to talk? And you chose my girlfriend to start a new life? I rushed to my father, almost grabbing him by the collar, but David took a step back, raising his hand. Alex, stop. Listen, I understand how it looks, but the story is much more complicated than you think. Sarah's mother appeared from the corner of the room. A mixture of pain and anger was visible on her face. Emma also stood behind, ready to intervene if something happened. So the four of us ended up in one room, a family destroyed by betrayal, and a girl who became the catalyst for this tragedy. A heartbreaking confession. Jennifer gathered her courage and spoke quickly, as if she was afraid that her father would say it first. I didn't mean to ruin your relationship with your parents, Alex. But when your parents broke up, I felt some kind of strange affection for Mr. David. I felt sorry for him. He seemed so lonely. At first, we only talked about design, about the future home. And then, I don't know how it happened. It just happened. She burst into tears again. Mother Sarah looked away, as if she didn't want to see this scene. And I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. It just happened? My words sounded cracked. You were my girlfriend, and he was my father. How could you? David sighed heavily. Alex, do you think I wanted this? I'm shocked myself. But I can't control my feelings. Your mother and I lost touch a long time ago. And Jennifer, I didn't want to hurt you, but you did. I interrupted him, feeling my chest tighten with despair. Like you, Jennifer, you both destroyed everything that was most precious to me. Attempts to justify yourself and the collapse of illusions. Dad took another step forward, as if he wanted to hug me or at least touch me. Son, I'm ready to take full responsibility. Jennifer is young and confused. I pushed her. Don't blame her alone. But I jerked back, hiding my eyes full of rage and tears. Don't you dare make excuses. You betrayed your mother, me, Emma. Jennifer is. It's my fault. You two are strangers to me now. Strangers, do you hear? Mom covered her mouth with her hand, trying not to cry out loud. Emma hugged her, helping her to stay on her feet. Go. There was silence, broken only by Jennifer's muffled cries and Mom's sobs. I felt like I couldn't take it anymore. Get out of here, I hissed, looking at Dad. Get out of my house. And you too, Jennifer. I don't want to see you. You ruined everything. Dad tried to answer, but I wasn't listening anymore. I turned and looked at Mom and Emma, asking with a look, Do you mind if they leave too? Mom nodded, barely holding back her tears. Jennifer, sobbing, got up from the sofa. She walked to the door without even glancing at me. Dad stood there for a moment, as if frozen. Then he gave me a hopeless look and followed her. When the door closed, I felt as if an iron ring had been squeezed around my chest. I fell to my knees in the middle of the room, unable to hold back my sobs any longer. Mom ran up and hugged me, sobbing. Emma stood next to me, shaking with tears. Thus ended what had once seemed like a strong family and my bright relationship with the girl I trusted. Everything shattered into pieces, and I, flooded with tears and anger, had no idea how to live on. After the night the truth came out and Father David left home with Jennifer, our family was left in a depressing silence. It seemed as if the walls of the house had absorbed all the pain and were now reflecting it with every step and look. The consequences for Mom. My mother, Sarah, although she showed courage at the climax, was actually on the verge of nervous exhaustion. She withdrew into herself, leaving the house less and less often. If she did, it was only to the nearest store or church, where she volunteered, trying to distract herself from her own grief. I, Alex, saw her barely moving around the house, sometimes forgetting about elementary things. Once she put water on for tea, and then she herself collapsed into a chair and sat there for over an hour until the pot boiled. I had to constantly watch over her, help with the housework, and at the same time, a heavy ball of resentment and despair lay on my soul. Emma's feelings. My sister, Emma, also reacted difficultly, although in her own way. She tried to spend more time with the school musical ensemble, rehearsals, and friends. When she returned home, she hardly spoke. I guess that she was terribly hurt that her father had betrayed her mother and the entire family, but she did not know how to express it. Music became her salvation, because there, at least for an hour or two, she forgot about the family chaos. In the evenings, I heard Emma sitting in her room at the piano, strumming quiet minor chords. There was something indescribably sad in her playing. Sometimes it seemed to me that it would be better for her to cry or scream than to carry all this inside. The town learns the truth. Our drama could not remain a secret. In a small town, news travels fast, especially when it comes to scandal. The fact that David, a once respected man whose son had gone off to Concord College, was now living with a girl who had once dated his own son shocked many. Gossip spread like wildfire. Some neighbors whispered in disgust, calling it the biggest scandal of the year. Others pitted my mother and me, and meeting me on the street, would sympathetically grab my shoulder and say, "Hold on, kid." There were also those who simply waited with curiosity to see what would happen next. My mother's friends, having learned about this, tried to support her, but she often refused their company, afraid of judgmental or even overly sympathetic looks. Alex's devastation. I myself felt the gap between my past and present widening every day. College awaited me, but my thoughts kept returning to home. I couldn't concentrate on lectures and projects. Questions burned inside me. How could Jennifer, who had hugged me and promised to love me, end up next to my father? Can I ever forgive her? How can I go on living when my own father betrayed not only my mother, but also my trust? I spent hours in my room, flipping through old photos of us all still smiling together. Dad was tinkering in the yard. I was nearby. Emma and Mom were baking a homemade pie, and I caught myself thinking that it would never come back. Even if he crawled over tomorrow with an apology, the wound was too deep. I simply didn't see a way back to the old relationship. First encounter with Dad after the disclosure. A few days after that terrible confrontation, David came to our house. I wasn't home, but Emma said he wanted to see Mom, probably to talk about the divorce officially or something. But Mom wouldn't see him. She didn't even leave her room. Emma told Dad that no one wanted to see him here. Dad didn't seem to answer and quickly left. That evening, I finally got up the courage to call David myself. I picked up the phone, dialed the number, and held my breath, but he didn't answer. I called back later, but I didn't want to talk anymore. I think we need time. Or maybe there can be no more communication between us at all. Jennifer's disappearance. As for Jennifer, she hasn't been around either. She stopped contacting me, blocked her social media accounts. I had heard rumors that she was still living with her father, either in his apartment or somewhere else. I didn't really want to know the details. Any mention of the two of them together made me sick. Some people whispered that she had tried to get into her local university but had taken a leave of absence or changed her plans because of the scandal. Even if that was true, I didn't care. My trust in Jennifer was gone forever. A little bit of hope. The only person I still tried to be strong for was my mother. I could see her pain suffocating her, and I knew that she was not to blame for David's actions. It was important for me to hold on for her sake, and for Emma's sake. We all needed each other's support. Even though I felt utterly devastated, I knew that if I broke down, it would kill my mother. That night, when I was helping my mother with dinner, she tried to say for the first time, "You know, Alex, I've learned one thing. Life doesn't stop, even when it feels like the world around you is falling apart. Once upon a time, thank you for not giving up." Her words lit up my soul for a moment. I felt that maybe there would be a chance for healing in our future. But the road to it would be long and difficult. Back to college. It was already the second week since I, Alex, found out about my father's cheating on me with my girlfriend Jennifer. I must admit that every day was hard, as if I was carrying a rock on my back. But life does not stand still. An important period of semester project began in college, and I could not afford to give up. My roommate Marcus looked at me with concern. "Listen, man, I can see how hard it is for you. But if you keep on studying, you might drop out of college. You don't want that, do you?" He was right. I had to relearn life again. Get up early, go on dates, immerse myself in difficult programming tasks. It helped distract me from the pain a little. Sometimes, going to bed, I would see Jennifer or my father's face in my dreams. But during the day, I tried to control myself. Family support. For my part, I called my mother, Sarah, and my sister, Emma, more and more often, and not only to find out how they were, but also to hear their voices. Paradoxically, we became closer than ever. We were all united by a common grief. "Alex, everything is more or less fine with us. I even invite my mother's friends over to my house again. She is slowly recovering," Emma said. "I often play the piano and she listens. I guess it helps her a little not to sink into bad thoughts." I listened to these words and felt a mixture of joy and pain. Joy, because my mother is not completely declining. Pain, because I remember the circumstances under which we all found ourselves in such a pit. Meeting with a lawyer. One day, my mother informed me that a date had been set for an official meeting with a lawyer to formalize a divorce from David. As it turned out, he had no particular objections and even agreed to leave our house to my mother. The main condition was a division of property, including the workshop he was going to sell. "I'm afraid of this meeting, Alex," my mother confessed over the phone. "I don't want to see his face again. But we need to resolve this officially so that there are no more grounds for any complaints." I offered to come and be there, but my mother refused. "I've had enough of torturing you. I'll handle it. You just pray or support Emma and me from a distance, that's enough." David's last day at home. On the day he and his mother were supposed to decide everything, David came home to pick up the rest of his personal belongings. I drove to the town, despite my mother's objections, stopped in the car near the house, avoiding a direct meeting. I saw my father carry several suitcases and boxes to his car. My mother stood in the doorway, leaning against the door. They were talking to each other, but I was too far away to hear. Finally, David lowered his eyes, got into the car, and slowly drove away. My mother stood there as if stunned. I felt that there was no longer the frenzy and rage inside me as before, only pain and the bitter realization that my father was finally leaving our home, and not just physically. Later, my mother said that they had agreed to a simplified divorce. She would keep the house, and she would pay him some of the money or give him a share of the proceeds from the sale of the workshop. She was glad that David had made no claims to the house itself. Perhaps subconsciously he did feel guilty. The first steps to healing. After the divorce was finalized, my mother seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Perhaps she saw that a terrible chapter in her life was closing. Now that I was home, we could talk about the past more calmly, without bursting into tears every 5 minutes. "Alex, you and Emma are the most important thing I have left," my mother would repeat, "and we have to stick together." I replied that I was sure of this too, although in my heart, I knew that I would have to live with the scar of betrayal. The only question left was whether I would ever be able to forgive David and Jennifer. Is it possible to forgive? This was probably the biggest challenge I had ever faced. My first impulse was to cross them off forever. I reached for my phone several times to write the messages with accusations and curses. But then I realized that this would hardly change anything. I thought about how anger and hatred were destroying me. Once my mother said, "Forgiving does not mean justifying. It means allowing yourself to live without this stone in your heart." I thought about her words for a long time. I can't say that I'm ready to forgive yet, but I definitely don't want hatred to eat me up from the inside for the rest of my life. A new beginning. A few more months passed. My mother continued to volunteer. Emma successfully performed at a music competition, taking first place, and I plunged headlong into my studies. We all gathered together again for Christmas, this time without my father, of course. But despite the sad occasion, this holiday in our house was not marked by tears, but rather with a sense of relief and hope. I don't know how our future life will turn out. Maybe Mom will meet someone who will be a good friend or new love. I will probably have a new relationship someday, more honest and healthy. And Jennifer and David? Who knows? Sometimes I hear rumors that they are still together. But for a long time? And were they even ready for the consequences of their actions? I understood one thing for sure. Betrayal by loved ones hurts unbearably. But even after such a trauma, you can remain yourself and not let life turn into ruins. It is important to have those around you who love you sincerely, without secrets and falsehood. For me, these are my mother and sister, and I am grateful to fate that despite everything we found the strength to stay together. Please subscribe to our channel Stellar Stories. We have new amazing stories coming out every day. Thank you.